So, hello everyone, and welcome to the Birthplace of Country Music Museum's virtual speaker series. This is our 11th version of this program, and we are very, very glad to see so many of you here, and also some repeat faces, so that's also nice. We really appreciate you joining us tonight. A few little housekeeping things before we turn to talking to Jennifer Licko. One is please stay muted and with your video off during the conversation. That just makes it a lot easier for us to see each other, to see Jennifer as she's speaking, and also not get distracted by other people. And remember that you might want to put your view on speaker view so that you can see the speakers in a large screen rather than all the small little icons. If you have any questions, which we hope that you will have questions throughout this talk, please put them in the chat. And Scotty, who is our tech whiz in the background and our facilitator, will be keeping an eye on those questions to share those with Jennifer after the conversation. Finally, we are also putting some other information into the chat box. Jennifer's website, for instance, she'll also be dropping some links in there later that she'll tell you about, but also just some information about the Birthplace of Country Music Museum and our organization if you want to learn more. And then we will be sending out a survey in the next couple of days after this talk. Please, if you have a chance, please fill that out and get back to us. It really helps us in planning for our next virtual speaker series programs in 2022, and it only should take you a couple of minutes to fill out. But now let's turn to our program, and I want to welcome Jennifer Licko here. She's talked to one of our other members of staff a while ago, Tony Doman, on Mountain Song and Story on Radio Bristol, and Tony recommended that we talk to her for virtual speaker series, so we're very excited to have her here. Jennifer was awarded Celtic Album of the Year by Celtic Music Radio and also nominated for Trad Album of the Year by Trad Connect. And she has a strong relationship with the music that traveled over with the Scottish settlers. Spending her youth as a competitive Scottish Highland dancer encouraged her interest and love for the Scottish traditions. Jennifer is an exceptional vocalist and multi-instrumentalist who plays the piano, guitar, and bodhran. I'm not sure if I've said that right, but Jennifer can tell us in a minute, which is the Irish drum. After living almost a decade in Scotland and Ireland, Jennifer realized the strong similarities between Scotland and North Carolina, and her music began to branch out into a genre that honors both of those connections. Jennifer works as a performer, an educator, and an advocate for cultural inclusion in education. She founded and operates the nonprofit Highland Echoes, carrying out 3 large-scale projects to support the mission of cultivating awareness and preservation of Scottish culture. She runs the Cultural Classroom, providing resources and support for teachers, and she has her own podcast called Respecting Diversity in the Class. So there are lots of ways to continue to follow Jennifer and to engage with her through all of her projects. And like I said, we've put a link to her website in the Zoom chat, so be sure and copy that onto your browser so that you can follow up and learn more about her work after this program. But now, most importantly, I would like to welcome Jennifer here. Thank you for being here, and we are excited to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. I was listening to you speak about me, and I thought, gosh, I'm tired just listening to that. I'm busy.
You have been very busy. Well, let's jump straight in. I mean, obviously you've had connections to Scottish and Appalachia culture from the places you've lived and the things, especially with the Highland dance. But what first piqued your interest in going down the route of Scottish music and dancing? How did you come to make that your focus?
Yeah, it's a really a strange story. And as a side note, what I find really interesting is the more people I talk to that are in the same genre of Scottish dance or Scottish culture or what have you, they all have these really interesting stories about how they came to be a part of it. And so mine is just one of many stories. But mine is, my aunt was actually a Scottish Highland dance teacher and a judge. And I never really, I mean, my aunt was my aunt, so we did family things together. But one Christmas, and when we got together for Christmases, it was in Spivey's Corner, North Carolina, which is a corner, hence the name. So we did not have a lot to do there. It was in the middle of a cotton field, and so one Christmas she just said, "Wow, Jennifer, your legs turn out really nicely. I should teach you how to dance." And I said, "Sure. There's nothing else to do. We might as well." So that's how it all started. And at first it was just learning the dance, and I just was interested in the dance itself. And then she started taking me to the competitions, and Scottish dance competitions are held at Scottish Highland Games. And so just by the nature of being a dancer and competing in it, you get the culture all around you, because you're seeing all the clans being represented, and you're seeing the people do the heavyweight athletics, and you're seeing the pipers and hearing the pipers. You can't miss the pipers. And so because of that, it opened up a whole world to me over time. I mean, the first time it was just like, wow, what is all this? And then I got used to it, and I competed for many years. So it was a constant in my life, and it became a part of my life. And so that's how it all started. And how I ended up realizing it was more than just a dance hobby is that I majored in music education, as my mother and my grandmother did. But I knew that being in the school full time wasn't for me. I knew that from the very beginning based on my personality. But I knew I loved teaching, and I loved sharing. And so I knew that was a part of me too. But I went to major in music education, and it was actually my vocal professor who said to me, "Jennifer, you love this Scottish dancing. You're always going to these Scottish festivals. Why haven't you ever sung the music?" And my answer was, "I'm not Scottish." I mean, that was my answer. "I'm not Scottish." And she said, "You don't have Scottish heritage?" And I said, "Well, yeah, actually we do, but I've never really looked into it." And she said, "Well, Jennifer, you have to do an honors project your junior year. Why don't you make this your honors project? Why don't you look into Scottish music?" And that's when I dove into it, and it was like connecting all the dots for me. And I thought, wow, how come I never knew all of this history, not only just about my own family heritage, but just North Carolina in general, and our heritage that connected to Scotland. So that's kind of how it all got started. And I have always been the person that thinks life is short. You do what you love to do, and you figure out a way to make it work. So that's how it came to be my focus.
Well, and that's a good philosophy. And it's also obviously been very beneficial to all the students and the people that you've been sharing that with. So we're very grateful that you're doing that tonight with us. But, so many of our participants probably know that there's this connection between Appalachia and Scotland and Ireland and England. There's obviously through immigration, there's the sharing of many cultural traditions. Like you, so many families in the Appalachians can trace some of their heritage, at least, back to the British Isles. And with the music and dance, now that you sort of told us about how you sort of got in the interest, how does your work now connect to that history? And how do you sort of bring all those strands together?
Yeah, and it's a lot of strands. One of the things that I knew, as I mentioned before, I love teaching, and I knew that I needed for that to be a part of my life. And so early on, I began putting together programs and lesson plans for elementary schools so that they could learn about Scottish culture. And not only was it contributing to the just awareness of cultural diversity, but also the awareness of our American history. And so I made sure that the assembly that I gave when I visited all these schools would be assemblies that integrated into the curriculum, number one, because that's important. So I made them very standards based, and then I also made sure that it was eye-opening from things are different. Things can be different and still interesting and okay from a cultural diversity standpoint. And then also just an awareness of our American history and how the Scottish people who immigrated to America have really created our culture, not alone, but contributed to the creation of the culture that we have today. And so that's been a really important part of my life. And I think it's how I make that my career is by educating other people, and especially children. And it's beautiful because they soak it all in and they take it in with no walls up, and it's so nice. That's one of the things that I do, and I now that we have the pandemic and I don't travel to schools anymore, I have a full program that's for free for any school at all, elementary school, and it's a standards-based program with lesson plans for teachers to use that also give the chance for them to explore maybe a walking song or a type of work song from the Highlands of Scotland in the music class. And, in the reading class, they get to explore Robert the Bruce and the Spider, which is a famous legend from Scotland. So we have lesson plans for all of the elementary school. So that's very rewarding, and it's been really nice to hear from the teachers and to hear how they're using it and getting pictures and videos back from the students. That's always special. And then finally, the other way that it's kind of my work has touched on the history with music and dance is we do the nonprofit that I run, we do a show called Highland Echoes. And that show is basically the story of the Scottish diaspora. It's not, we say a lot of the times it's like Riverdance, but it's not like Riverdance because it's, well, number one, it's Scottish, but number two, even though it has that volume and it has that feel, it actually tells the story of who we are today in the Americas and in Canada and in Australia and in Cape Breton and, all these other places, who we are today because of the immigrations, because of what happened. And so, I think that's really valuable for audiences because I'm going to go back to my statement when my music teacher asked me why I didn't sing the music. And I said, it's because I'm not Scottish. I'm not Scottish. I'm American, but I am part of the Scottish diaspora, and that culture has affected who I am and who all the people around me are. So I think that's a really beautiful thing that I have really enjoyed a lot.
Yeah, I was reading a lot about the Highland Echoes on your website and thinking how much I would really love to see that show. And I have some connections, of course, back to Scotland too, and just I have never done anything to chase those roots. So I really liked the idea of sort of learning a little bit more about that immigration process and how people migrated here and the impact it had.
Yeah.
And, being a music museum, obviously we're focused, our interest is always on the songs. So tell us a little bit about some of the songs that connect the Appalachian region to Scotland and how those songs have changed over time. And I know that language plays into that too, and the way that language changes. And so just sort of walk us through that.
Yeah, this is a heavy subject. This is a heavy question. But I like that. I like that it's a heavy question, but I think that what's the most important thing I want to start with, and that is it's not like a point A to point B situation. It's not like, here was the song in Scotland, and then it came over, and now it's changed, and it's like this. Yeah. Because, immigration didn't happen one time. Like, there were over hundreds of years, people immigrating from Scotland to various places in the world, not just one spot. Mm-hmm. And you think about, the 1700s, the 1800s, when you are in one spot and other people go to another spot, you're not mingling with each other when you get there. So I think putting ourselves back into that time and realizing that how the immigration, yes, it did change the music. in some places. In some places, it preserved the music. So I think that you get so much variation with regards to how the songs have changed. And that's why songs like Barbara Allen have over 100 versions, published versions, almost 200 published versions. That I don't mean just a different arrangement of someone playing it differently. I mean different words and different melodies, even different like scale degree. Like if you're into music, we're used to the 7-note scale, and there are even some that are in the 7-note scale and some of the pentatonic scale. So it's very interesting how that's happened. There's also there's Barbara Allen, there's Lord Randall. I don't know if you're familiar with Lord Randall. That's another one that has like 100 different versions. And I think this is because of the fact that the immigration didn't happen at one given point in time and to one place in time. So you can imagine how those songs change just with regards to, oral tradition is like that. It's like the game telephone. The game telephone, when you start with a phrase and you whisper it to the next person and they pass it down the line. And then when you get to the last person, it's changed. And that's exactly how, it's not exactly, but that's a good example of how this happens. And then you mentioned, with regards to language, that's another really interesting thing, because the philosophy of sharing songs at that point in time, and for a long time, was more about sharing the story. Mm-hmm. It wasn't about making people feel connected. Like I feel like music today is all about giving us hope and comfort and connecting us and making us feel like a sense of belonging. This is a really strong part of musicians today. It's a strong part of me. That's my mindset when I get on stage, is to connect to the audience, like to make them feel something greater than they can feel when they're sitting at home not listening to music. That's my goal. But that wasn't the goal of songs back then. The goal of songs then was to tell a story. Mm-hmm. And so their way of delivering the story was about making it relatable and not putting too much expression into it, not adding harmonies and things like that. The idea was just to deliver it and let the song tell the story itself. Well, if you're doing that and everyone around you, knows a certain vocabulary word or knows a certain location, you're going to change that song to fit the location around you and to use names that are comfortable. They're names that other people have around you. So that's why you see a lot of the vocabulary in songs changing, is because they made the song relatable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that other people could sort of place themselves in the story, I guess.
Yeah.
And one of the songs that we talk about at the museum is obviously the Carter family's "The Storms Are on the Ocean," and we had an exhibit a few years back about Cecil Sharp as a song collector here in America. And we talked about the song that I can't remember what the very first version of it was called, but it was the Lord Gregory ballad, mm-hmm. and how that changed over time. And you can find all these different variations of it up until a point when the Carter family recorded a variation of it at the 1927 Bristol Sessions. But like you said, radically different in some ways from that original ballad. I mean, in length especially, but also just the language that had changed, but the small similarities that were still there that connected them. It was really interesting.
Yeah, and I have some slides, and I'm going to share, because some people might want to go a little deeper here. I'm going to share my screen. So stop looking at me and look at some slides here. Keep things going for those that need. Let's see, how do I, sorry. I don't know what, Oh, it was hiding off screen. Okay. So I wanted to go back. You mentioned Cecil Sharp. Way before that was, the child ballads. And I don't know how familiar anybody here is with this. And it's fine if you're not. It's fine if you are, because if you are, you just like hearing about it again, right? It's quite amazing. This American man who put together these ballads. And you can see here that basically in the Appalachian region, for just isolating that section, you can kind of generally categorize the different types of ballads as the child ballads or the native ballads that were already there. And that's pretty powerful when you think about that. And his work was pretty massive. But how wonderful that we have this, because these ballads were mostly from England and Scotland. And when you look at the ballads, you will notice that most of them, 42% of them were actually Scottish. I mean, he titled them American and Scottish and English, that kind of thing, but 42% of them Scottish, and that's pretty major. So you're probably wondering, like, how do they know that? These were the most popular songs in the Child Ballads collection. Barbara Allen, The Damon Lover, Lord Thompson and Fair Edit, The Gypsy Laddie, Lord Randall, and Young Hunting. If you look at all of these songs and you try to find all the versions of them, you can see the similarities or the elements that kind of say, yeah, that's definitely a Scottish ballad. Some of those things these are the common elements. The subject matter, which I know back then a lot of songs were about lost love, but there's this different way of talking about lost love and migration and struggles and fears that really point to being a Scottish ballad, whether they're talking about the location or they use words that are definitely Scots dialect words, or words that were similar to Gaelic words or actually were Gaelic words. And then the other thing is the gap scale, which we talked about earlier, and that's the pentatonic mode. And that's basically when you leave out the fourth and the seventh of a scale. The scale as we know it, the 7-note scale as we know it. And this was used so much in Irish and Scottish music, but really not that often in English music. So that's kind of a real major, eye-opener that these songs definitely came from Scotland, being able to combine all those things. And then I talked earlier about the language, how that kind of changed over time. It's definitely something to look at when you're looking at a ballad to see where it came from. But it's also worth looking at all the versions that go all the way back because that may have changed. I don't know what my next slide is here, so I'm going to. Oh, yeah, just basically the conclusion. And this wasn't a conclusion I made. Let me just say that. Many people have researched these ballads and basically came to the conclusions that the song being sung most widely throughout the mountains in the Appalachian Mountains were variations of Scottish songs. And so, it's just very powerful how many there were during that time. And there's also, just as another thing, I don't know if you're familiar with Sheila K. Adams.
Yes.
When you listen to her speak and you listen to her talk about, where she grew up in, what is it? What's the name of the place? Sodom? No. Is that right? It's in Madison County. I can't remember the name of the town.
I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, it starts with the S, I'm sure. I just can't. It's on the tip of my tongue. She talks about how close they all were as the 4 families that lived there, and how they didn't have a lot of interaction with people outside of that town and outside of those 4 families, and how preserved that music was. Mm. And when you listen to her versions of the tunes, they sound to me more Scottish than all of the later variations of tunes that you'll hear, of these Scottish songs. Mm-hmm. And I find it fascinating, even though the songs that she probably did travel, down from Pennsylvania, down the wagon trail, and probably did change over time. But still, she has more of the, she and Jean Ritchie, their songs sound way more Scottish than some of the other versions that I've heard of the more popular songs.
Right. And in the chat, we have a couple of people confirming it's Sodom Laurel.
Oh, Sodom. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I was gonna go into Barbara Allen, because I think this is it's one that everybody knows, right? I mean, this is the song that everybody knows. Even I've spent a lot of time singing in bars and pubs, and I sing Irish music, Scottish music, so people always ask for this song. It's just very, very well known. But if you look at the earliest version, it was 1690. And the first verse says, and this goes back to how language changes, in Scarlet Town where I was bound, there was a fair maid dwelling, whom I had chosen to be my own, and her name, it was Barbara Allen. Now the common one today is 'twas in the merry month of May, when green buds all were swelling, sweet William on his deathbed lay for the love of Barbara Allen. Now, this is just the opening line. Sometimes these verses reappear in other parts of the song because they add so many verses. Again, maybe they don't lose a verse, maybe they just add a verse. So these are some of the different names that it's been titled: The Ballet of Barbara Allen, Barbara Allen's Cruelty, Barbara's Ellen. I mean, all of these different titles alone. I find it fascinating in kind of a nerdy way. But then also when we talk about the tunes and how they change, again, knowing that, the changes aren't from point A to point B. Most of the American versions of this one are with a pentatonic scale and don't have that clearly defined tonic note. But there are some that definitely you can hear and you can find on YouTube. I'm going to put the links in the chat that are in the 7-note scale. So this to me is a really great example of the changes that we were talking about earlier. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I want to put these, if you don't mind, I want to put these links in the chat of some different versions of the song so that you can paste them into your browser, because I know that once the meeting ends, that you won't have a chance to go back and grab the links. So the first one I'm putting is a Dolly Parton version that she did with Alton.
Yeah, and Scotty, if you don't mind to copy those too, we can send them to people with the survey so that they also, in case they don't get them copied across, we'll send them in the email with the survey too. So if Scotty will copy those across, we'll have them also.
Will do.
Yeah, if you have that interest in listening to those, I think it's really, and oh my gosh, it can send you down a rabbit hole, because then there's hundreds of versions out there that you can listen to hear the differences. I don't know how many of you are interested in the music aspect of it, but here I have, these are just, it's not a great graphic, I apologize, but I've got this first one here where just the first line of the song goes from going to a unison, like the same note, then jumping up to a fourth and then down to a third or up a third. That's a 7-note scale. And then the second one immediately goes to the third and then up a half a step and then up a second. And then the last one starts going up a second and then going up a minor third and then going up a second. So these are just 3 different versions that I found in a quick search on the internet of different music and how different just the opening line is. Mm-hmm. It's crazy.
Yeah. And I think, we're talking about songs, but I think we also see some of this in dance styles. I mean, I know, when we're talking about Appalachian mountain style dancing, we think here of like flat footing, buck dancing, clogging. You as a Scottish Highland dancer, what kind of similarities and differences do you see in that tradition?
Well, it's interesting. Scottish Highland dance is very regimented and very strict and it's not folk dancing like square dancing or Scottish country dancing. And it's more, when you look at the history of the dances with Scottish Highland dancing, mm-hmm. It's like, the Highland Fling was done as a victory dance after the men would win battle. and all these dances were done by men. And they were done for a purpose. It was like, okay, the sword dance will be done now before we go to battle. And if you touch the sword, it's kind of a bad omen. So now these are legends, but of course, these legends carry a lot of weight, and they came from somewhere. So I think that the Highland dance, I don't see anything similar to Highland dance that has influenced any dance in the Appalachians. I mean, I just don't see it. What I do see is the Scottish country dancing, the social dancing, the Ceilidh dancing. And that I think is really interesting, because that wasn't just strictly in Scotland. I mean, you have that in Ireland, you have it in France, you have it in Spain. And so all of these European influences, I'm sure, ended up being an influence on the social dancing that was done in the Appalachian Mountains. I mean, when they get together, what do? You play music and you dance. And so it would be that social dancing. Another factor into what's probably known as square dancing, or I'm not as familiar with dancing in the Appalachian region, to be honest with you, but my understanding is that, more from a musical standpoint, is that one of the big differences is that the musicians who would play for the dances in the Appalachian region were normally African American. So their culture and their feel for music certainly influenced the way the dancing happened.
Yeah.
I mean, the music drives your movement. So there's that element also that probably made some changes. And if you look at Scottish country dancing, it's a little bit formal and refined, but it's got the same types of eights and movements and that type of thing that I'm sure you would find in square dancing. And then when you talk about clogging, that's another thing that, again, even in Ireland, you have Irish dancing, which is, the step percussive style dancing. You had it in Scotland. It was step dancing, but it was lost when it was lost. Like the language was almost lost, but it was lost, and the people who immigrated to Canada kept it alive. So there was a whole group of people. I think it was starting on the Hector. I think that was the first ship that came to Canada or went to Canada, and they ended up in Nova Scotia, and they were isolated. So they didn't have any other influences. So they could speak Gaelic the whole time. They did the step dancing. They played the fiddle tunes. So everything there is completely preserved, pretty much without any influences. So it's really interesting to see. If I look at Cape Breton step dancing, I can say that's definitely, what I'm sure Scottish step dancing was like. Right. But if you look at clogging, you could say that could be a mix of Scottish step dancing. That could be a mix of, other influences that have come into play, because step dancing, it also happened all over the world.
Yeah.
In various forms. So one of the things that is different is that in Scottish dance, we do have things in a triple measure, or in a triple meter, like 6/8 or 3/4, jigs, so to speak, waltzes. You don't find that in Appalachian dance music. You normally find more traditionally, you're like 4/4, 2/4, which is just, I feel like I don't know if I'm speaking too much music.
There will definitely be musicians in our audience who are nodding.
Okay, good.
Well, I lived in England for several years, and I went to several Scottish Ceilidh country style dances. And then I came back here and did proper square dancing for the first time when I started working at the museum. And I definitely saw similarities between that. So I see what you're saying about that. But I just always assumed that there was more of a connection between some of the like flat footing and that kind of thing. I can definitely see it, I think, more in clogging, like you said, but I just sort of assumed there was more of a connection, or more of a tangible connection, at least.
Well, and there could be. It's like I said, this is what I am telling you now is just based on my perception. Yeah. So I don't have as much studies behind me when it comes to dance, apart from just being a Scottish Highland dancer.
Right. Yeah.
My ethnomusicology studies have pretty much been in the way of music itself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, besides, the song and the dance, and some of this is still about song, but both Appalachia and Scotland have these rich oral traditions. And, we mentioned earlier about the purpose of some of these songs was to tell stories. So the storytelling just as itself, but also ballads as stories. And do you see these oral traditions continuing today in both places, and that there's connections still between our region and Scotland and some of those things, or because it's not part of an active immigration thing, is there a break there?
Yeah, I think there is definitely an interest, and there's an interest with younger people. You see people going to workshops and trying to learn these old tunes, fiddle players, pipers, singers. I definitely think there's a strong interest. That's not to say that it's going to be carried on the same way for a couple of reasons. The first one is, there's not a culture that really nurtures that ballad style singing. There's just, when you would sing back then, back in the olden days, when you were singing while you worked. So the songs had work song movements, and it was a way of life, and there was a culture around that way of life. Just as you would sit on your front porch and sing songs together and sing songs with your whole family, I don't see that happening, because that's not the culture in which traditions are passed down.
Yeah.
It may happen in some places, but today most people are actively seeking out a workshop to learn,
right,
or classes to learn, or a teacher to learn, and that's fantastic. I mean, that shows some great effort, because it's not ingrained in their culture.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's just different. Again, it's like I said earlier, also as musicians, I feel like, for example, I don't like to sing a song if I can't feel a deep connection to it. Because if I don't feel a deep connection to it, I can't deliver anything that's going to make my audience feel connected. And that's important to me. I don't know if carrying on the tradition of songs, I don't know if that connection was important. I think, again, it was about the story. You were just the way of delivering the story in a different way. So, I just think it's a different way of carrying on the tradition. Not the same, but that doesn't mean it's bad. Maybe because it's that way, there's more of an effort put into it. I don't know.
Well, and you just mentioned about connecting to your audiences and the emotion of it, which leads me to another question. And I'm thinking particularly of the Highland Echoes show that you do. You work with a lot of different audiences. Obviously, with that show, you've got a performance audience, but I assume it's also a student audience for some of the work that you do. How do you think that the music and the dance, how are you working to intersect the music and dance in that setting to connect the audience to the story you're telling, that story of the diaspora of Scottish people, but also with the emotion and feeling? How do those work together?
Yeah. Well, so now with Highland Echoes, we started off with a group of 4 dancers. And we call it the beta show, because it was really us trying to figure out how we were going to make this work. Now we have 25 dancers. And some of these dancers are champion dancers who have only, maybe they've performed some, but their goal is winning the next competition. They're athletes. And that's how it's always been. So it's interesting that you asked this question, because our dance team has meetings about this a lot. We have to constantly be reminding the dancers to feel the music and to deliver the story. And most of them are so grateful to have that opportunity, because most of them really got into Highland dance because they love dance and they love expression. And so like I said before, all of these dances do carry a legend with them. And one of the dances we do in a traditional format, it's called the Flora McDonald's Fancy. And that is a story of when Flora McDonald was holding her skirt over on the ship to hide Bonnie Prince Charlie, and as she helped him escape. And this story is shown in a dance, and the dancer's holding out her skirt and moving around, to try and cover him up. And so when you know that story, then you see the dance, you make that connection.
Right.
And then we're singing the song about it. We're telling the story through the lyrics, and we're using the traditional elements from Scottish music, the instrumentation, and that type of thing that helps evoke that feeling, puts you in that time like, oh gosh, this was pretty crazy that this woman did this. Did she do it?
Yeah, I'm just imagining how that would have worked.
I know. But, again, it's like these legends. You're like, is that the whole truth, or is a little bit of this changed over time? But again, it's really just about making people realize their history and realize all that happened for us to be where we are today. And I think having the music, especially having live music and the dancers together, I think it just gives more aesthetics. It gives more, it caters to more people, because not everyone is a person who wants to only see or wants to only hear. They need the whole thing. And so when you have all of it around you with the lights and the music and the dancing and the costumes, yourself, when you go to a show like that, everything is heightened. All the senses are heightened, and it's inspiring. And so that's the goal.
I'd really love to talk to some of the audience, especially ones who either have been learning about their heritage, sort of digging deeper into their family stories and that kind of thing, and what kind of emotions that would evoke for them to see that sort of spectacle of all those different things coming together to tell that story.
Well, and I think again, like I've said before, I think it's so important for people to realize that they are a part of the Scottish diaspora, even if they haven't traced their family roots or they have no traditions in their life that they think are Scottish. It's just important to know you belong, because this is what is around us, and it has shaped you or influenced you in some way. And I think feeling that sense of belonging is probably one of the most important basic needs we all have as human beings. And so I really value that.
Well, and, that sort of touches on another question that I had, because you do a lot of work about cultural diversity, especially in the classroom, because of your background in education. And, that feeling of belonging, it's not always just about, oh, I'm part of this one community. It's also fitting your community into a host of other communities. When you're doing that educational work about cultural diversity in the classroom, how do Appalachia and Scotland fit into that sort of lesson that you're trying to teach?
Yeah, well, I think what's important is that people realize that immigration happened. In fact, if you look at the IB program, which is the International
So Jennifer has frozen briefly, so let's see if we can get her back with us, and we'll start over with that question as soon as we do. Jennifer, are you still here?
She's not on, but I'm guessing she'll jump back on.
Yeah, she must have had to jump off, but she'll jump back on in a second.
Yeah, I think it probably kicked her off or something. She's in Brazil, correct?
She is in Brazil, yes.
So yeah. So while we wait, Renee is going to sing
Barbara Allen.
Barbara Allen for everyone.
Yes, that would definitely get all of the rest of the participants off the call very, very quickly. So I'll wait and do that at the end.
While we give her a second, I could try playing one of these YouTube videos.
Yeah, that would be great. Can you try and do that?
Yeah.
There we go.
All in the merry month of May, when the green buds they were swelling, young William Green on his deathbed lay, for the love of Barbara Ellen. He sent his servant to the town, to the place where she was dwelling, saying, Master's sick and he sends for you, if your name be Barbara Ellen. So slowly she got up, and slowly she came anigh him, and all she said when she got there, young man, I believe you're dying. Oh yes, I'm very low, and death is on me dwelling. No better I'll never be, if I can't get Barbara Ellen. Oh yes, you're low and very low, and death is on you dwell.
Well, we have Jennifer back with us. Yay.
We have her back. So.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I was talking and I thought, why is everybody else frozen and I'm just talking?
That's okay, because I wasn't sure if it was just me, so I had to text Scotty and say, is she frozen for you too? So
Well,
I don't think any of us heard the answer to my question. So why don't we go back to that?
I'm going to try to place myself back to where I was going with this. The IB program for the elementary schools. It's an inquiry-based program, and part of it is discovering, talking about immigration, talking about where we came from as people, like first of all who your culture is, and then also talking about immigration and how that's affected you and how it affects the people around you. So I love this unit of inquiry in the PYP program, and when I do the program with Scotland in the class, and when I do my performances at schools, I simplify a lot of it because we're talking about 6 and 7 year olds, but I definitely simplify it by saying, hey, do you know this song? And I sing Skip to My Lou. And they all start singing along Skip to My Lou. Well, that happened because, and then we do talk about, I mean, I have little character names for, Mr. and Mrs. McDougall, who, took a boat all the way over to North Carolina and settled here. I simplify a lot of it. Obviously, I don't talk about the immigration that happened in the Cape Fear and the immigration that happened to Pennsylvania. And I don't go into all that because it's too much. It's just, in a 30-minute assembly, it's more about giving them an introduction on Scottish music, Scottish dance, and then briefly telling them people immigrated here, settled here, and now we sing songs here today, songs that that originated in Scotland, and give them examples. It's a very simplified way, but it works. And then people send me pictures, painting pictures of mountains. And, it's fantastic.
Well, so I have one final question before we see what the audience and participants might want to ask. And that's about, we mentioned a second ago that you were in Brazil, an expat living there. Do any of the Appalachian and Scottish music and dance traditions connect or show any similarities to some of the traditions you see in your new home of South America?
So I'll make this brief. No. No, I adore Brazil. My husband is from Uruguay, which is south of Brazil. It's a small country south of Brazil and next to Argentina. Argentina and Uruguay has a heavy Scottish influence. And so it's really fascinating. My husband was a Scottish country dancer.
Oh, wow.
I couldn't believe it. And actually in the school that he went to, they have over 100 dancers doing Scottish dancing. It's incredible. And there's a large group of Scottish pipe bands all throughout Uruguay and Argentina. So I think there was, the last I heard was like 100,000 Argentines who have Scottish descent. So you do see that in that area. In Brazil, not necessarily. It was a different group of people who immigrated here, but they do love it.
So do you share the Highland Echoes with them at all?
We have not yet. It's on our list because actually one of the dancers is from Brazil and our drummer is from Brazil. They live in the same town that I live in Sao Paulo. So we're discussing it. It would be really great to do that. It's a heavy load.
Well, that ends my questions. I think we probably do have some questions from the audience. I know I have actually one that was sent to me pre-talk of something that one of our audience members wanted us to ask. So I'll start with that one, and then I think Scotty has a couple of others.
Wait, let me ask mine first because your last question kind of is a good segue.
Okay. Yep. Go ahead.
So I was this is from me, and I was just going to ask, it was two-tiered. I was going to ask if, in your studies and experience, if you meet people from other, countries or cultures other than the U.S. And the British Isles that are interested in the traditions. So that's part of it. And then I was also going to ask, with that in mind, how are young people in Scotland interested in learning the tradition? Because I kind of think about, the music from our area and how I see it. There are people from the area that are young that are getting into it, but then you see people from places that are very surprising. So.
Yeah. So to answer your first question, I can tell you that here in Brazil, like I said, there's not really a Scottish influence, a great mass of people here that have Scottish heritage. We do have a St. Andrew's Society, but most of them are British or, Scottish people who have come over and are expats here or Europeans that just want to speak English with a group of people. But they love it. And we do have a Scottish Highland dance teacher here who fell in love with it. And her story is pretty incredible. I wish I had time to tell you that. But it was an accident and she heard the pipes and her thought, because she was already a dancer, but not a Scottish dancer. She said, oh my gosh, if the music sounds like that, what could the dance be like? I have to know. And that's how she started. And now she's a dance teacher. And we've actually done some filming with all her students here in Brazil, filming them doing some dances with us. So that's been really, really nice. And there's a Highland Piper here in town that a similar thing in that he heard the Highland bagpipes, a Roadrunner episode. I thought, I never saw that, but he said, oh my gosh, he was a little kid. I have to play those. And he sought out a teacher and now he plays the pipe. So by way of these, interesting circumstances, people get locked in and they're like, I have to do this. So it's really interesting. The second part of the question was what? The young people in Scotland.
Yeah, the youth culture
Yes.
of Scotland and how they are interested in.
The older I get, the more I realize I'm not sure if I'm connecting with the youth and I should be answering for them. But I used to think it was funny when I lived in Scotland. People would get to know me and say, "Now, why are you here again?" And I'd say, "Oh, because I started off as a Scottish dancer and I really wanted to learn Scots Gaelic. I fell in love with the language." And wait, you Scottish dance and you speak Scots Gaelic? You're more Scottish than I am. I don't do any of those things. So I used to think that was funny, but I think there is an interest in the folk community. Like there is that group of folk dancers. I don't care what generation it is. Those people that have that interest, like they do take part in it and they keep it going.
Well, and that actually makes me wonder, what about Scottish interest in Appalachia? We've talked about people here having that interest because of their ancestors. Do you also see that happening across, like, their interest in us?
Absolutely. It's come full circle, actually. I'm sorry, I'm not kidding. It has come full circle. And in fact, I think they're more aware of it now. As the world gets smaller, the more they're aware of this connection that there is between us. And a lot of great musicians have done some wonderful recording, like combined. Someone from the Chieftains, of course, they recorded with everybody. But I mean, there have been some fantastic, I forget, the transatlantic sessions. If you listen to those on YouTube, I believe you've got singers like Karen Matheson from Capercaillie, who's a Scots Gaelic singer, teaming up with some bluegrass musicians. I can't remember who at this point. But those are really neat to watch because they do this. There's one with Julie Fallis, who's a great Scots Gaelic singer and piper. She does one with some Appalachian musicians, and they do "My Dearest Dear." And what's interesting about that is definitely a song that started across the pond, so to speak, and changed over time. And so it's really neat to watch those videos and kind of see that they're connecting through music. It's nice.
Well, I'm going to ask the question that came from one of our participants who sent it through to me earlier. But in the meantime, if you have any questions or comments, please do put them into the chat because we really want to hear from you. But this is from Tony. And Tony's just appeared there on the screen. And she wanted to know, you wanted to know, do you want to go ahead and ask it the question yourself?
Yeah, hey, Jennifer, this is a really great question. It's so good to see you. I just wanted to ask you a question about like lilting and mouth music, because it's a really interesting thing that you've recorded some songs. And I know that maybe I myself had never heard of mouth music until we had a conversation about some of this Scottish heritage and Appalachian connection. So I was hoping maybe you could share some of that, just kind of explain what it is and let some of our listeners know what that is.
Yes, I love that question because I love mouth music. Mouth music, it's called push-to-beol in Gaelic, and it literally means music of the mouth. And many people would say that it originated because when the bagpipes were, banned, they were, deemed an instrument of war, and you could not play them, or you would face severe punishment. When this happened, they needed to find a way to preserve these dances and these tunes. And so they set all of these tunes to lyrics, to Gaelic lyrics, their native language. That's the story. However, there's evidence showing that they were doing this well before that. It just came in handy during that time. So I love it because it is dance music and I'm a dancer. So for me, it was kind of my initial love for Scots Gaelic music. I will sing some for you because I feel like you have to hear it. But I'll do something really simple. Let me think of something. I'll do something really simple. With the interesting thing about the lyrics is they didn't choose lyrics to tell a story. So this isn't like the ballad tradition where you're trying to deliver a story. This is trying to match the rhythm. This is trying to sound like the pipes. And even in a lot of the workshops I've been to, I've heard other pipers at the same workshop, doing their piping thing, learning to sing the tunes first, and fiddle players learning to sing the tunes first. So this is a really a marriage between the language and the music, and so it's really kind of interesting. Okay. Shma tahi armayet him jana shma tahi armayet him the pause shma tahi armayet him jana shma tahi armayet him the pause ibi you bi shin the love bora khali ibi you bi shin the love bora ibi you bi shin the love bora khali shma tahi armayet him the pause. So that's just a way you can hear like that Scott snap in there really strong as you would hear in the pipes. And I love this. And actually, there is a quite famous one in the Appalachian Mountains, and it's called, what is the name of it? I can't remember. It's like Pretty Little Girl with the Blue Dress On. So you'll hear that tune and people will sing it. And it's the same type of thing. Singing it, it's not like they're telling the story about anybody. They just chose a line that's kind of repetitive. I think it's pretty little girl with the blue dress on, pretty little girl with the blue dress on, pretty little girl with the blue dress on, so my mule away she's gone, or something like that. So I think that's really interesting. It goes to show they were kind of in the, that maybe that wasn't even a Scottish tune, but it was the same kind of philosophy of when you share tunes that you could also sing them if you didn't play an instrument.
Mm. That was so interesting. I'd never heard of that before. So I was really excited when Tony sent in that question because I was like, what is this? And it really, you were saying that it's related to sort of imitation of the pipes.
Yes, or the
and
fiddle.
You can definitely hear that in it. Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I was going to say that I have some videos of singing more push-to-be-all or mouth music on YouTube. And if you go to my website, also there's a place where you can get. I just have a link on the homepage for some free songs, and I think one of them is some push-to-be-all. I can't remember which three they are now, but. Right.
Well, and someone also had a follow-up question about something you said earlier about the dancing. And that was, I think it was more about not being sure that they had understood, was about when you said something about some of the dances were performed by men only, or did you say that, or did you say it wasn't by men only?
No, it was by men only. The
Okay.
Scottish Highland dancing was performed by men only. And now it's done by women. But men and women compete against each other. So it's not like you have separate categories or anything. So it takes a great deal of strength. A lot of the dances were to show their strength. Mm-hmm. So it's really cool today that mostly women are doing these dances that require so much strength and endurance.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because from what you were saying, from what I remember, it feels like the origins of them were these performative gestures within conflict between clans or between different groups, that was the origins of some of those dances, was within that sort of need to have a show of strength or a show of skill or that type of thing to intimidate the others or to bring good luck to the process.
Yeah, and actually there's one called the Chartreuse, and it's all about when they weren't allowed to wear their kilts anymore. Again, after the Battle of Culloden, when the English took over and were, saying you can't speak your language, you can't play your tunes, you can't wear those kilts anymore. So the movements actually have shaking actions where they're like trying to shake off their trousers, and it's that rebellion, like get rid of these. I'm not wearing these trousers. So all the movements in that dance are about shaking off their trousers. And then at the end, the very last step, the tempo picks up and you dance fast shedding steps, which is the dance the steps from the victory dance. and they're celebrating because they're wearing their kilts again. So it's like you said, it's like showing their strength, showing their rebellion, and it's really from a different place than more of the social dancing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Scotty, are there any other questions out there, or any further questions that you have, or anyone else that wants to just jump in? Please do.
No, nothing else. I'm sure I could think of some other things, but
oh wait, here's a comment.
Okay. So this is from, if I can see, Marigold Wilson. She is a redhead Scotch German in the southeast USA. Do you want to read that, Renee? I'm having some trouble. I can't see very well.
Yeah, so she says, I'm a redheaded Scots German in the southeast United States, new to the world of music, but I love the idea of Celtic music. I've sometimes called it ladies singing beautiful nonsense sounds. But it's probably Gaelic, or possibly that lilting that you were talking about with the mouth music. Can you speak about Scottish songs that aren't telling a story in English?
Yeah, in fact, I mean, Christian Bale is definitely a good example of that. It's not about telling a story. I mean, sometimes they're telling some stories, but most of the time that's specifically for the imitation of the instrumental music. There's another type of Scottish song that comes from the Highlands. It's called walking, but there's a U in there, so it's WAULKING. And walking is a process where you have the tweed before it's been made into its kilts and blankets. They would soak it in urine for a couple of days to soften it. And then the women would sit around a large table, and this process of getting it prepared was called walking, and they would beat it into the table and pass it to the next person. So they're taking their cloth and pushing in, pushing out, pushing left, pushing right, and passing on. And so this would happen all day long. I mean, it was a long work job. It was a long job, and probably not very pleasant with the smell, but they would sing songs to pass the time, and it would also help them keep the beat of the walking going. And so this would really not be a storytelling thing, but you would always have a leader. It was like a call and response type song. So you would always have a leader that would sing one line that's like a verse, and then everybody else would join in on the chorus part. And normally the chorus weren't words, they were vocables, like those aren't Gaelic words. It's just like singing fa la 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 la. Mm-hmm. And then the singer, the lead singer, would sing a verse, and then they would come back in again and sing the chorus. So these would last a long time, and depending on how long they needed to pass the time, people would just add verses. So sometimes it could be about a story that happened last night. I saw Rick and he was dancing with Ellie, whatever they wanted to sing to share the gossip. That would happen. I mean, sometimes you had some more formal verses, but I would not classify that as storytelling. I would classify that as a work song, and it just has a different purpose. For sure.
And so many work songs are like that repetition, like you said, to keep you in the sort of groove of the music that you're doing, or the work that you're doing, so that you can just keep going with it, even though it's hard and unpleasant.
Right.
And it really motivates. And we have several more messages. So people have gotten over their shyness. So here we go. This is from Debbie Keith. One of my favorite movies is Songcatcher, which is available on YouTube. They talk a lot about the pentatonic scale and go more in depth into the musical history in North Carolina mountains. And it was filmed on the Carolina side of the Smokies. A wonderful story, but not rated for the very young. Let's see. Did Janet ever dance at the Loch Norman Highland Games held at Rural Hill Farm in Huntersville, North Carolina?
Now, when I was dancing, it wasn't at Rural Hill.
Okay.
I'm dating myself here.
Okay. It took a minute.
Yes.
And, someone was saying, I loved that music too. Here's Carol Westlake. I loved that music too, especially thinking about the Birthplace of Country Music Museum So the song catching is part of our, song catching is part of the story that we tell a little bit. But she was saying that she watched that movie at least 4 times, Carol Westlake. And then Lydia Hammersley, who's one of our previous virtual speaker series speakers. Hi, Lydia. She says, I'm not sure about Janet McTeer and if she danced there, but I know that Phil Jameson, Asheville, North Carolina dance expert, was the dance consultant for the Songcatcher film and taught the actors how to flat foot clog for the barn dance sing. And then she also says Sheila K. Adams was the one who taught them all the ballads on that song, on that movie. She was the music consultant, and she makes an appearance in the barn dance scene playing the banjo. So all these connections, people we've talked about earlier.
And she's amazing. I mean, her story is not what, like I was saying earlier, with people who are interested, it's not like she was interested. It's just, it just fell in her lap and in such an isolated place that it's just such a special, she's such a special person in that regard. She holds so much information that most people would never have the opportunity to have in their life just because of the way she was brought up. I just think that's so cool.
Yeah. And I mean, so many ballad singers, when you talk to them, they're like, I'm 8th generation ballad singer. They are tracing themselves back very far about how they have been passing down that oral tradition in their family. We had a lady called Donna Ray Norton at the museum when we did the Cecil Sharp exhibit. And she was, I don't know, maybe late 20s, early 30s. So she wasn't an older lady, and she was saying she was 8th or 9th generation ballad singer in her family. And I just thought that was so interesting that tradition was so strongly being passed down, but from very far back in their ancestry.
Yes, absolutely. It's really fascinating, I think. Yeah.
One more person. Everyone's really excited about Songcatcher.
I'm going to have to watch that.
Iris DeMint sang and acted in Songcatcher. And, Donna Ray Norton is a relative of Sheila K. Adams. I'd forgotten that. Sheila learned her ballads from a lot of the Nortons. I remember Donna saying that, actually. So thank you, Lydia, for reminding us of that. If we don't have any more questions popping up, I'll keep an eye on it while I sort of wrap up. But thank you, Jennifer, so much for being with us here all the way from Brazil. So that's pretty exciting. It's been really great talking to you, and we could have talked for much longer. And I feel like we'll probably want to talk to you again in the future. So
I would love that. Thank you for having me. It's like I said in my email when you asked me how much I love talking about this, because it's what I love more than anything. So, I've made my life. My cat is scratching me on my back saying, Mom,
like, are you done yet? Yeah.
But I love talking about this. So anytime someone has any questions or just wants to reach out and chat with me, please do. You can find all my information on the website. So
awesome. Yes. And we will, like I said, we will send that information with the survey tomorrow so that you have all those links to the songs that Jennifer was talking about. But besides saying thank you to Jennifer, I want to say thank you to the audience for being here with us. We appreciate how many of you stopped in with us and helped us to bridge the traditions between Scotland and Appalachia. We hope that you will join us next month for our final virtual speaker series of the year. That is going to be on Tuesday, December 7th. That evening, you will have me, you will have Scotty, who you can see up there, and you will have Erica, the curatorial team at the museum, and we will be talking about music and work. So the types of songs, we've talked a little bit about that tonight, but the types of songs that were sung while working or about work, songs that were used in protest movements about work, like unionization and mines and that type of thing, but also how work productivity can be tied into music too. And that's to go along with our current special exhibit from the Smithsonian, The Way We Worked, that opened a week ago. If you are local, please be sure to plan to come see that exhibit. It's really great. And it'll give you some good context for that virtual speaker series on December 7th. We are currently planning our 2022 season year of virtual speaker series, and we're hoping that at least some of those will be hybrid. So some of them will be where people can sit in our performance theater with us, but also we want to share them with our virtual audiences, because we're so grateful to how many of you all have joined us from all over the country and sometimes even further afield. So keep an eye out on our website about that. A few other things that are coming up in the next couple of weeks. You can catch November's Farm and Fun Time show on Thursday, November 11th. So that's 2 days from now at 7 p.m. via Radio Bristol's Facebook Live or YouTube channel. That's going to be featuring the Steel Wheels and Willie Carlisle, and should be a great show. It's also celebrating the 75th anniversary of Farm and Fun Time, so that will be exciting. Then on Thursday, November 18th at 12 noon, we have Radio Bristol Book Club. We'll be talking about Hear My Sad Story, the true tales that inspired Stagger Lee, John Henry, and other traditional American folk songs by Richard Paulenberg. As always, if you want to read the book beforehand and share your comments and questions with us, we would very much love to hear from you. And then finally, don't forget that you can also catch Erica and Scotty and I on the other Thursdays of the month on Museum Talk at 12 noon on Radio Bristol, where we talk about all the weird and wonderful things in the museum world. And again, we welcome questions from the audience about things that they want to know about. So please be sure and check us out. Join me in thanking Jennifer Licko again for joining us tonight and being such a wonderful presenter with a really great talk that I think all of us got a lot out of. And that's about it. So thank you.